places buttons maybe underneath the base.
Right underneath? Yeah, you got it. Huh?
Well, it is battery, so battery may have run out.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
You just needed to shade it, that's all. It's not
Okay, thanks for coming out this Thursday evening. I know there's other things you could be doing, and I appreciate your presence. We're going to have a conversation tonight on ethics. My name is Beverly Hernandez. I'm the president of the Northampton County League of Women Voters. We are doing this in conjunction, co-sponsored by the South Side Initiative. So we've been working on this quite a while, and I think you'll be very pleased and interested in what has to be said tonight. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization whose purpose is to promote political responsibility through informed participation in government. Our moderators tonight are Dr. Kincaid and myself. Dr. Kincaid is a professor of the Lafayette College and is the director of the Minor Center for the Study of State and Local Government, which educates students about the importance of state and local government and encourages them to participate in state and local affairs. It engages in local, regional, national, and international public services, training, and outreach to state and local governments and civic organizations. Our format tonight consists of the following. Dr. Kincaid will start by explaining the need for ethics in government. Basically, what is ethics? He will then introduce the panel. Each panel member will give a statement up to about 7 minutes in length, just to explain how their work impacts the question of ethics in local government and what their experience is. Dr. Kincaid and I will ask questions of the panelists after their initial presentations. Please there's cards and there's pencils available. We want this to be a conversation with you. We want you to be writing questions. Susan, the League Women, Susan and Mary and maybe Joan, will be collecting the questions. And we would ask that they would be civil and directed to the topic at hand. We'll be reviewing the questions to make sure they're appropriate. For the greater part of the forum, the audience will ask questions of the panelists. We're going to try to have a fireside chat type evening tonight. It won't be timed closely, and we'd love to hear from you and what your concerns are. The bathrooms are, if you go out this way, all the way to the end of the hall, turn left and go all the way to the end of the hall, and they're on the right. So it's a little bit of a hike. At the very end, Dr. Mary Holtz of the Southside Initiative will be making the closing statement. So with that, let's get started.
Thank you, Beverly, and I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for inviting me to moderate this panel. This is an important panel because we should work hard to make sure that government ethics is not an oxymoron. Ethics are important in all aspects of life, but they're especially important in government because you can't really stop being affected by a bad government the way you can stop doing business with a bad doctor or a bad supermarket. You're sort of stuck. So public office is a public trust. It should be exercised for the public gain and not for private gain. So the public trust requires really elected and appointed officials to place the public's interest above their personal interests, sort of fundamental to ethics. Government affects everyone's well-being, not just the members of our family or our business circle. So elected officials really must be stewards for everyone, and that's something they need to keep in mind. Elected and appointed officials must treat everyone within their jurisdiction impartially. And elected and appointed officials must also, very importantly, obey the federal and state constitutions, as well as state laws and local ordinances. We also have to bear in mind that government extracts revenue from all of us to pay for services. So those services should benefit everyone efficiently and equitably without theft, waste, or under-the-table deals. And government should operate, therefore, as in an open manner, as transparently as possible in a democratic society. Elected and appointed officials also, in my view, should avoid the appearance of impropriety, especially so as not to provoke mistrust of government and discourage public participation in government. And finally, while an ethics ordinance is a good thing, an ordinance should serve as a foundation for recognizing that most people in government are basically decent, and that an ethical culture that fosters and rewards proper behavior and discourages bad behavior is necessary for an effective ordinance. So what matters most, I think, is the extent to which an ethics can be woven into the fabric of everyday life and work and government decision-making. And an ethics ordinance can be the first stitch in that kind of fabric. And maybe that's what this conversation here tonight will achieve in the city of Bethlehem. So with those remarks, let me just briefly introduce everyone on the panel, then we'll call on panelists one at a time. So I have a sense of who we have on the panel. At the very end here, we have Brian Jasonson. He's the Deputy Executive Director and Director of Investigations for the Pennsylvania State Ethics Commission. Thank you very much for coming out.
Thank you for inviting me.
Sitting next to Brian, we have Lee Chapman, Director of Policy for the Department of State, and she manages the department's policy and regulatory development process in coordination with the Governor's Office of Policy. Thank you, Lee, for coming all the way out from Harrisburg as well. Thank you very much for that. Going next, we have Mr. Shane Creamer, who is the Executive Director of the Philadelphia Board of Ethics. And so they actually have an operating board, which he told me over dinner was 10 years old. So they have a good deal of experience. And then sitting next to Shane, we have Michael J. Cook. He's the Director of Enforcement of the Philadelphia Board of Ethics. So he's the guy, I guess, with a hammer, and maybe he can tell us stories about how he's used that hammer during his experience. And then our last speaker, last but not least, is Dr. Julio Garidi. He's the Director of Contract Compliance Programs with the Delaware River Joint Bridge Commission and Vice President of the City Council of Allentown. And Allentown, I understand, has a new ethics ordinance, and so we look forward to hearing from Allentown's experience. So let's begin with the state. And Brian, could you lead us off with about 7 minutes of comments or so?
Thank you. On the frieze of the finance building, which is the building that we're housed in, is something written along the lines of public office is given in trust and accepted with honor. And that basically is what the Ethics Commission was created to instill. We're here to strengthen the faith and confidence of the public with their public officials as well as the public employees. The State Ethics Commission has been in existence for approximately 35, 36 years, and we are an independent state agency with jurisdiction over every elected official in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So, for example, we have jurisdiction over the governor, members of the General Assembly, City Council, county, borough, township, water, sewer authorities. We also have jurisdiction over a majority of public employees in the state, so individuals that work for public entities we also have jurisdiction over. The Commission has three main goals. Our duty is to advise, regulate, and investigate. We issue advices and opinions, which is a non-adversarial free service that we provide to public officials and public employees as to whether or not their conduct falls within the guidelines of the Ethics Act and whether or not action that they may be contemplating would be in violation of the Ethics Act. We also regulate. We regulate through the statements of financial interest forms, which are completed by public officials and a majority of public employees in the state. And although those forms are less prominent as they used to be. People don't seem to want to be able to, don't want to use those as a resource. They were initially created as a first line of transparency and the first ability for the public to have information as to what are the finances and the financial dealings of their public officials and public employees. Lastly, we investigate. When all else fails, we do have the authority to investigate alleged violations of the Ethics Act, and we can hold an administrative trial and administratively adjudicate individuals for violations of the Act with the ability to levy penalties as well as fines in some instances. So we really are a tool that is to be utilized by both the public officials, public employees, as well as the public to ensure that the well wishes of the people are being carried out through their government. Because if the public does no longer have the confidence and have instilled confidence with their public officials, then our entire system of democracy, essentially, in my opinion, would fail. So I think we have the most important job in the state, but that's something for people to debate.
Yeah, let's thank Brian for his comments.
Thank you.
So our next speaker is Lee Chapman, who came in from Harrisburg, again, the Director of the Policy for the Department of State. Has the floor.
So thanks for having me. My name is Lee Chapman. I'm the Director of Policy at the Department of State, and the Department of State oversees charities, corporations, elections, professional licensure in the state of Pennsylvania. So as the Director of Policy, I work in conjunction with the Governor's Office of Policy to develop and do bill analysis, as well as develop policy and also analyze regulations. I also work on special projects, and last year one of the special projects that I worked on was helping develop the Governor's government reform agenda, which was actually something that was really interesting, and I'm going to go over that quickly tonight with you all. But I just wanted to give you a few statistics to frame this conversation. So according to Pew Research, I'm sure everyone here is familiar with Pew, the public's trust in the government has steadily declined over the years. Only 19% of Americans say that they can trust Washington to do what is right. And in Pennsylvania, according to a Gallup poll that was conducted in 2013, in Pennsylvania, only 46% of Pennsylvanians have, quote, a great deal or amount of trust in their state government. And that ranks the fourth lowest out of all states in the country, with only Maine, Rhode Island, and Illinois ranking higher. So as an appointee of the governor, one of the things that he was a priority for him was government reform. So the first day that he became the governor in Pennsylvania, he actually issued an executive order that would ban all gifts for appointees. So it's funny because Brian and I were joking. I was like, I'm not sure if I can actually drink this water, but it's okay, so that's good. But so all gifts are banned. So appointees cannot take, vacations or conferences. I actually attended a Pew conference last year in DC, and in order to eat the lunch, I had to write a check, and then the state then reimbursed me. But it's because the governor really does not want public officials to have their decision-making process clouded because of gifts. So Governor Wolf, he has also been a big champion for transparency. So he's put his calendar on the website, as well as all the expenses that he has incurred, as well as all the cabinet secretaries on the website. So like I said, he developed a 5-point government reform plan, and I just want to quickly go over that with you. The first point of the governor's reform plan is to institute a gift ban for all public officials. So by executive order, that just touches public officials under his jurisdiction, so appointees like myself. But he would like the gift ban to extend to the legislature as well as the judicial branch. And Pennsylvania is only one of 10 states with no specific law and limits on gifts to public officials. The second point of his agenda is to require disclosure of the amount of compensation received by public employees from outside employment. and he wants to ban paid service on corporate boards. So in Pennsylvania, a lot of legislators have dual jobs, but they don't report exactly how much they make on their outside jobs. So that's what this would actually entail. And before 2014, judges in Pennsylvania could actually serve on corporate boards. So they could serve on the Hershey board or the Highmark board and make, $100,000+ a year, but that was banned. But he would like to ban that to members of the legislature. His third point on his agenda is to implement broader pay-to-play provisions, requiring the disclosure of campaign contributions made by parties seeking contracts. So in 15 states and the city of Philadelphia, there's a requirement that companies that want to do business actually have to disclose their campaign contributions, but for the state, that's not a requirement. So he wants to extend that to the state. The fourth point on his government reform agenda is to increase the Departments of State's ability to review lobbying disclosure and make referrals to the Ethics Commission. Right now, annually, the Department of State only looks at 3% of lobbying disclosure filings, and then they randomly audit them. The governor would like that to happen to all lobbying disclosure filings. And the fifth point on his reform agenda is to enact strong campaign finance reform. In Pennsylvania, we're one of 12 states that impose no contribution limits to individual donors. So donors can donate as much as they want to politicians, and the governor thinks that we should restrict unlimited donations and the fact that there's no contribution limits. So just to frame this for you, this is the governor's agenda, and in the last legislative session, 30 bills were introduced that touch government reform, but none of them passed. All of them got stuck in committee, and these were bills that were introduced on the Republican side and the Democratic side. So there's definitely an issue there because it's very hard to pass government reform legislation. At the Department of State, we also oversee elections, and as you all know, in Pennsylvania, we're not the most progressive when it comes to administering elections. We don't have in-person early voting or no excuse absentee voting like 37 other states do. So there were over 100 bills that were introduced the last session to reform elections, and none of those passed. So, if this is something that you are passionate about, I would really encourage you to contact your state legislators or your state senators and say that, we need government reform in Pennsylvania and as well as election policy reform.
Thank you, Lee. Our next speaker again is Shane Creamer, who is Executive Director of the Philadelphia Board of Ethics.
Thank you. So the Philadelphia Board of Ethics has the responsibility, the mandate to administer, interpret, and enforce the city's public integrity laws. Those public integrity laws include the Ethics Code, which is a series of conflict of interest rules, gift restriction, and also financial disclosure requirements. The city's campaign finance law, the city does have contribution limits and mandatory electronic filing. So campaign finance reports that get filed by the state or the counties in Philadelphia, they also must be filed with us electronically. Also, we administer the lobbying code, which was passed in 2010. So principals, lobbyists, and lobbying firms must register with us, and then principals must file quarterly expense reports on all paid efforts to directly or indirectly influence legislative or administrative action. And then finally, we have jurisdiction to enforce and interpret the political activity restrictions in the charter, which are similar to the Hatch Act, the Federal Hatch Act, if any of you are familiar with that. The board has, as Dr. Kincaid mentioned, we're in our 10th year. This month is our 10th anniversary. The original board members were sworn in on November 16th and installed on November 27th. We're actually confirmed by City Council on the 16th and sworn in on this 27th. And so we've been around for a while. It's funny, up until earlier this year, I used to describe us as a new agency, but after 10 years, I think you can't say that anymore. The 10 years have gone quickly, but they've been exciting. We have a 5-member volunteer board that gets appointed by the mayor and confirmed by city council. They have term limits and they can only be removed for cause. We've had excellent appointments to the board, and I think that's one of the most critical things to have is really high-quality board members who serve with fidelity and integrity and without any kind of bias or agenda. And so far, we've been very lucky with that. And we are independent of the administration. So that means we don't report to the mayor or anyone in the administration. I'm the executive director, I'm the head staff basically. We have 11 staff members, we have a budget for 12, we have 1 vacancy right now. Our budget has been fairly stagnant at $1 million since our inception in 2006. It was cut back during the recession in 2008, 2009, and then restored by Mayor Nutter. The operational independence is critical for an agency like ours and like Brian's, that we can't be influenced by political considerations or the whims or desires of the administration. But that also means that we're sort of on our own. We don't have any natural allies in city government, so we have to sort of fend for ourselves. Another dimension of our independence, other than being operationally and decisionally independent from the administration, is we are legally independent from the administration, which means we don't rely on the law department or the solicitor to interpret the public integrity rules, which I listed. We have a general counsel who can interpret, and the board has the ability to interpret these laws. That's important too. In Los Angeles, for example, the Los Angeles Ethics Commission doesn't have that right to interpret their laws. They have to go to the city solicitor. I forget the title. I don't think it's solicitor. It's the city lawyer, I think, for interpretations of the law that they administer and enforce. And we're also independent in the respect that we can conduct our own investigations. We have subpoena power. We can get bank records. We can compel people to come in and give statements to us. And that's a critical component of not only our independence, but also our ability to conduct thorough investigations. By comparison, the New York Conflict of Interest Board, which is one of our models, LA being the other model, can't conduct their own investigations. It's a very strong agency. They've been around for about as long as the Pennsylvania State Ethics Commission. But New York City has a Department of Investigations, and so when the New York Conflict of Interest Board, which administers their ethics code, wants to investigate something or have something investigated, they have to refer it to a different agency, the Department of Investigations, wait for them to do their investigation, and then refer the results back to them. So they have to sort of be careful about what they want to refer to that agency, because that's sort of a big deal to do that. We can conduct preliminary inquiries, we can sort of look at things and decide not to an open investigation after we do a preliminary inquiry, or we can decide to proceed either on our own initiative, which is important. I can see something in the paper or learn something and start an investigation, or we accept complaints if they state facts that state probable cause that a violation has occurred of one of our laws. We will accept that complaint. And our investigations are conducted with confidentiality. We can't disclose any information about the nature of investigation until there's an outcome. And we have about a 95% settlement rate with our enforcement actions. We have about 110 settlement agreements in the past 10 years. The bulk of them have been campaign finance, just because the sheer volume of campaign finance reports generates a lot of work for us. We had 40 settlement agreements alone, and last year was a major election cycle for us, and I think we had most of those 40, I think about 30 or 35 involved campaign finance. So that's the bulk of our enforcement work. Michael's going to talk more details about our operations next, but so that the final dimension of our independence is we we have the ability to sue the city in mandamus in the Court of Common Pleas if we feel that we have been given an inadequate budget. So that gives us some protection from retaliatory budget cuts. The only other city agency or department that has that power is the city controller, which conducts financial audits of city departments, and like us is not well received all the time by other departments in the city. And so that ability to challenge a retaliatory funding cut gives us some financial independence too. We have never exercised that power. The Controller's Office has done it twice over the past 30 years, and I think both times they won their cases. So that is sort of an overview of the structure of the Philadelphia Board of Ethics, and I'm going to have Michael talk about more operationally how we have sort of filled out over the last 10 years.
Thank you, Shane. Michael Cook again, who is the Director of Enforcement of the Philadelphia Board of Ethics. Michael?
Thank you. So as you heard Shane say, the board has jurisdiction over a number of City of Philadelphia laws, the campaign finance law, the ethics laws, lobbying laws, and so on. And one of the key components when the board was created in terms of its powers was the power to conduct investigations and enforcement actions to make sure that those laws are followed, and that when they're not followed, that there's a sanction for the failure to follow them. In order to make those powers real, that we could actually exercise our duties, there's a couple provisions in city law. One is that all city employees are required to cooperate with the board in the course of its investigations, and failure to do so is its own violation of the ethics code. And the other, which is very important, is that we have the authority to issue subpoenas for the production of documents or to compel witnesses to present testimony under oath. And so that gives the board very real power to conduct investigations and enforcement actions. And I think it ends up being very notable for the board because it's an example of the tremendous amount of thought that went into the shaping of the law that created the Board of Ethics and the underlying laws that we enforce. And after you heard what Lee had to say about efforts that didn't quite materialize in Harrisburg to create some similar ethics legislation, you won't be surprised that this didn't happen overnight in Philadelphia. It took years and years and years of effort on behalf of city council and mayors who were interested in it, the local community, good government organizations, to piece by piece, sometimes in big jumps, sometimes in little pieces, that led to when in November of 2006, the Board of Ethics was installed as an agency that had real power and real protection, independent, able to do its job, with a body of laws that it could enforce. And early on, the board made the decision, or came to the realization, that you don't want all that effort to go to waste. A lot of people worked very hard over a long period of time to bring that into being, and now we got to show people that it mattered and that their time was well spent. And a very clear way to do that is through robust enforcement. And the board felt that it's important to demonstrate that these rules matter and that we're going to take our enforcement activities seriously. And so over the past 9 years, I would say, it took a little while for the board to get up and running. When it first started, it was Shane sitting in his kitchen with a laptop saying, so minutes from a meeting, how do I do that?
So I would Google minutes of a meeting. That's what that looks like.
And so, you know, it's, again, nothing happens overnight, but, you know, you gotta jump in, and over those past 9 years, we've conducted well over 100 investigations of potential violations of our laws. We have had enforcement actions, both brought in court. We've brought suit in court to enforce our laws. We've brought suit in court numerous times to enforce our subpoenas, filed administrative actions, and as a result of all the activity have been able to conclude around 100, I think, successful settlement agreements wherein the folks who had the issue admit to the violations of the relevant law, and in most cases agree to pay a civil monetary penalty and take remedial action if necessary. So that's, as Dr. Kincaid said, the hammer. But it's interesting to think about, what kind of hammer is it? I mean, is it a sledgehammer? Is it a rubber mallet? And how do you use that hammer? Our maximum penalty for a single violation is $2,000, which personally, if somebody asked me for $2,000, I'd be reluctant to pay it. That's, it's a good chunk of change, but it's not, a life-destroying amount of money for somebody who's a public employee or most candidates for city office, and we're not sending anybody to jail. And yet, people react very strongly to our enforcement and investigation activity. And that's because when you're in the field of ethics and campaign finance, people take it very seriously if what they're being told is they've broken one of those rules, because they hear it as you're unethical. And they have opponents or even just members of the public will take it that way as well. So it creates a very heated atmosphere sometimes, and something that people take very seriously. So we have, or have had over the years, we've been very aware of these competing interests. On the one hand, you have the public that wants to see that these rules matter and that their public officials and candidates for office and lobbyists are being held accountable and they're not just getting a slap on the wrist. On the other hand, you have the folks who we regulate, who the vast majority of them are trying to do the right thing and trying to follow the rules, and they don't want to feel like they're getting hammered unfairly or for somebody else's political gain. And so as we developed our investigation and enforcement activity, we spent a lot of time thinking about how do we reconcile those things? How do we achieve good, lasting investigation and enforcement work? And what we sort of came to realize, or I think we realized early on that was the goal, although it's a challenge to achieve it, is it's not just the results, it's also how you get there. And that it's very important that that what we do is perceived to be fair and nonpartisan and apolitical. And that means that for us, we spend a lot of time when we're working our cases making sure we get it right, which means we're not going to go out and push the envelope legally or factually on a case. We want to win, not just to win, but because we want to be right. We want that if we're going to accuse somebody publicly of breaking one of these rules, that we have a stack of evidence to support it, and that our interpretation of the law is reasonable. And so that has meant it can be hard sometimes making those kinds of decisions, but from our point of view, it's well worth the effort to do so, and it extends beyond just the enforcement arena. That we've tried very hard not to get a sort of blinkered view of these things, because if you just look at it as a sort of more mechanical thing, you start thinking of enforcement for its own sake. I think you lose sight of the purpose of these rules. And the benefit of enforcement isn't to catch people. The benefit is to make sure that people have an incentive to follow the rules, and that the vast majority of people who do follow the rules see that it's fair to them, that I follow the rules and he didn't. Okay, well, he had to pay a penalty, and so now, I feel good about that people just can't get away with it. And so we try to couple our enforcement activities with a lot of outreach and education. We carefully review our laws to see if they need better explanation or interpretation through regulation, or we need to improve or amend them at the legislative level. So if we see a problem, we go and we try and fix the law so that people have as clear an understanding of it as possible, so when the time comes that we have to enforce, it's much easier for people to agree that what happened was fair. And that's an ongoing effort, and it takes a lot of reflection on our part to make sure we're staying focused on doing it the right way.
Thank you, Michael. Our local ethics expert is Julio Garitti of the Allentown City Council, so he'll bring a much more local perspective for us. Julio?
Thank you, Dr. Kincaid. Good evening. Two corrections. First of all, I'm not the expert, but we've been doing some things in Allentown. And second, that I was the president of City Council, vice president several times, but I'm not only a council member, I'm not a vice president of council. So just being ethical here, I want to disclose that. So in Allentown, most people in the Lehigh Valley knows what's been going on in Allentown because of the FBI investigation on the administration, particularly because of some contract wrongdoings. There have been 6 people who have pleaded guilty to participating on these rigging contracts and other issues, bribery and issues of such that have been very unethical. And one of the first things I did was when I found out, I found out that the FBI was investigating the city. It was really devastating for me because I part of obviously being on the longest serving elected official in Allentown. At that time, I was president of City Council, and had no idea what's going on with the administration in regards to this type of issues. There are 7 of us, like Philadelphia, who has 17 full-time members. We are 7 in Allentown, just like Bethlehem, and we're part-time. I have a full-time job, and basically do City Council for the love of the city and the love of the people, basically. The FBI started investigation, I think it was in July 3rd, 2015, and they started basically looking at the contracts and finding out that there were some wrongdoings, and obviously took thousands and thousands of documents from the city. And one of the things that I did is right away I started looking at how can we change this. We had just gone through such a great renaissance in the city of Allentown. New hockey arena invested over $1 billion in development in the city, and now we have this dark cloud in the city because of several people. And along with former Councilwoman Janae Eichenwald, we looked at how can we change that this doesn't happen again, because we didn't approve the contracts in the city. We really didn't have any idea of what they were doing, unless we asked questions, but we didn't know all the contracts that were going out. And I looked at, we started looking at all the cities and what they do in regards to making sure that we have some oversight of these contracts. And we actually looked at our sister city of Bethlehem and looked at they actually have a solution, 11471, which basically recognizes the ethics of contracts. And I looked at it and we borrowed it and we come to make our own legislation. So Councilwoman, former Councilwoman Eichenwald and myself sponsored legislation that we look at every single contract over $40,000 in the city, and also any contracts, any change order over 10% of the contracts. So we unanimously passed that legislation in August of 2015, Bill 39, 2015. So that helped us to basically start looking at, it's a lot more work for us as part-time people in council, but I think it's necessary that we look into this and that we try to keep the people honest. And since that, several members of the city administration, including the attorney, one of the solicitors, the finance director, the city controller, all pleaded guilty for breaking contracts, basically. And that, we decided it's also an issue in regards to pay to play. So we all voted in and developed another bill, Bill 58, 2015, and that was in regards to pay to play. And what we decided to do was look at campaign regulations and for non-competitive contracts, non-competitive bid contracts, and financial assistance in excess of $2,500. So council is not, all candidates not allowed to take any financial contribution for those type of over $250 contribution or in excess of $250 for non-competitive contracts or anybody who has a financial assistance from the city, like nonprofit organizations as well. And it can also be in-kind type of financial assistance. So those are some of the things that we've been doing, but we also been looking at how we can do better. We looked at other, we have a ethics board, and it's head by attorney John Donatelli. And we ask questions that we've been able to do some small things, but we're still looking to do better. Unfortunately, the problem is that we don't know what's going on with regards to the FBI investigation, unless we read in the paper, and just like you do. And it's been very difficult because a lot of people don't want to come over, don't want to do contract with the city, or they don't want to bid on contracts because of what's going on with the FBI investigations. We're kind of hoping that this thing ends quickly. I think in February or next year, February and March, there will be some sentencing of some of the people, or other people that supposedly they've done it several times. They schedule sentencing and then they reschedule them again and postpone them again, and now they have them hopefully for early next year, so they can we can find out what's going to happen. And the same thing happened in Reading. I just reading today, as a matter of fact, I know some people in Passaic, New York, and New Jersey. They just arrested the charge, and he pleaded guilty, the mayor of Passaic, New Jersey, for bribery. That's the third one in 25 years. Third mayor who pleads guilty for bribery. One of them was tax evasion and extortion and tax evasion, and the other two were briberies. In one city, and it's a city of 77,000 people, closely related to the population of here in Bethlehem. So we continue to work on those issues. We just talking to some member of Allentown who are Mr. Tratner, Mr. Lewis, I think he's over there somewhere, that they're also helping us. The community is helping us do more investigation. How can we look at other ethics legislations and what can we do to make sure that we serve the city with fidelity, as you said before. We're also looking at amending our ethics regulation, ethic codes, and looking at nepotism. Perhaps there's a lot of that going on everywhere, unfortunately. Looking at how much can we really, as candidates or as elected officials, should receive from a gift. I think right now it's about 25. I don't think we have a limit on gifts that can be given to members. But we're looking at probably putting some limits on that, if any, if we should have any gifts at all. We're looking at making sure that people who work in the city, I'll give you an example. There's a gentleman who was an electrician, and he's a code enforcement guy, and then can he have a business in the city as well? And if he does have a business, who's actually gonna enforce the codes? They're all together, they're friends. So those kinds of things are what we're looking to do. Getting more into the meat of things, and hopefully get more support from other agencies that are a lot better than we are. Philadelphia is they have a separate politics. I don't even get involved in Philadelphia politics. It's very strange, but I'm glad to see this gentleman, Mr. Cook, and Ms. Tony Cook and Attorney Creamer here doing great things. And I hope that we can champion this we probably have, I know another guy who's also gonna go to jail in Patterson, New Jersey. I mean, northern New Jersey, even southern New Jersey has no problems, but northern New Jersey is just like the epitome. Somebody was talking about that Pennsylvania, I think it was you, the Pennsylvania is one of those, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and I think another state, Virginia, I think you said, or Maryland, that they're, I'm not sure what New Jersey's not included. It's amazing. But anyway, we were looking at making sure that, we continue to grow our city and make it a lot more faithful to the citizens. And we're elected by the public and we want to serve the public. And I think the majority, I know the majority in council, the only thing we have, unfortunately, the power over is the budget of many cities across the United States. And we're looking at the budget, hopefully trying to do some things that will be beneficial for the citizens. Nobody wants to pay more taxes than what they're already paying. And we want to make sure that we have a good oversight so the taxes on chair, this year I'm chair of the finance committee, budget and finance of the city. And I tell you, it's difficult to keep taxes down, keep the services that we provide in the city, and maintain a good relationship with everybody. Somebody's going to be upset at us regardless. But what I'm trying to do with some of my fellow council members is to make sure that we keep the city safe, secure, and honest and transparent. And that's difficult because sometimes you get pushed from the other side, in this case the administration, on some things. But basically that's what I wanted to talk about. I got a lot of more material, but I know my timing is limited. So I'll look forward for more questions.
Thank you very much, Julio. So we will open the floor for questions and, or I guess questions will be submitted.
Yeah, questions.
So, did you want to ask the first question?
This is from the audience. What reasons do you hear from those who are not in favor of an ethics ordinance? What do you say to them? Who would like to take that?
We get that a little bit in Philadelphia, including elected officials. And what I like to say to them is that we're really helping them when we help them understand what the rules are. If it's council, we've worked with them over the years to amend laws, to improve them, to make them more understandable. We're trying to create clear boundaries for everyone and bright lines that everybody can see, and make sure there's education and training around those boundaries and rules. And if you comply, if you make an effort to comply, you're going to avoid making bigger mistakes. Dave Davies from WHYY, I don't know if you hear him up here. Before he joined WHYY, he was a columnist for the Philadelphia Daily News, and his last column, he worked there for I think 25 years or so, and in his last column he said the most remarkable thing that he has seen in Philadelphia was the creation of this new ethics board that had real teeth, and the way he put it, the main benefit for city officials is that we make a series of small corrections that prevents them from making bigger mistakes. And I pointed out to Dave recently, just a few months ago, that in the 10 years that we have been in operation, not a single high city official, elected official, has been indicted. And I don't know if there's cause or effect. I'm willing to take credit for that, or some credit for that, but I think there is something to that. And Dave agreed with me. And so I'll end this answer with a city council member who we had fined $20,000 at one point for campaign finance violations. We were meeting with him on another matter about a year or two later, and he appreciated our work and said, "You have upped our game." And by that he meant, we got to pay attention to these rules now, and you're making us be better public servants by following these rules. So I think, I would tell these people that we can up your game.
I'd note that councilman acknowledged that not all of his colleagues agree with him in his thankfulness for our existence. And so there's always differing opinions on these things.
But we do have this interesting relationship, and it's something that Michael sort of touched on. We have an interesting relationship with the regulated community, so does Brian, in that we're not just the hammer, we're not just the enforcement, we're also advisors and trainers. So we have a complex relationship with the regulated community, whether that be city officials and employees, or campaign committees and candidates, or lobbyists and principals. We've got to work with these people again and again on many different levels, and that's why we try to strike the right balance with enforcement, because we have these other mandates, and also we need to keep the perspective of we need to work with these folks in the future.
Another question from the audience is, does ethics include violations of the Sunshine Act?
That doesn't fall under our rules, but Brian, do you guys enforce that?
No, we don't. The Sunshine Act, which deals with open meetings, is not within the jurisdiction of the Ethics Commission. That's exclusively, that's a criminal violation. I believe it's a misdemeanor 3 at this point. I believe it's been increased the penalty. Those are handled either by local law enforcement, handled by the Attorney General's office, or through private criminal complaint. So if someone believes a violation of the Ethics Act has occurred, you could file a private criminal complaint with your local district attorney's office.
Here's one's kind of related to the other one. From the audience, do you think ethics ordinances can be excessive? In other words, can too many ethics ordinances hinder the process of government? Anyone?
I think that there are a couple different dimensions to excessive. I think you can have many rules, and if you have different rules that address the same conduct in different ways, it can be confusing and it can be hard to comply with those rules. And then I think you can also have rules that are poorly drafted. They either overprescribe or underprescribe. You can have rules that, if rules are perceived to be unfair, as being overbroad and burdensome, that's not going to help your ethics program, because people will not have respect for the rules. And when there are consequences for violations of rules that nobody respects, then people are not happy at all about that ethics program. So I think you really need to work hard to strike the right balance and make sure you're not, over-prescribing, overreaching in the rules, whether it be a gift rule. Gift rules are I think the gift rule is the most challenging rule in the public integrity laws that we administer and enforce to draw. But I think that you really need to be careful about that. And just overall, we see a strong ethics program as having it's like three legs of the stool. One, you have to have good rules. You need to have training on those rules, and then you have to have consequences for violations of those rules. And you really need to have all three legs in balance. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of having clear rules. And since we've been in operation in the last 10 years, council has come to us a couple of times now to draft improvements to first the gift law, and now we have a pending bill for conflict of interest. Now, the ethics code in Philadelphia was passed in 1963. I was 2 years old when that was passed. And it reads like it was passed in the early 60s. Very hard to understand, but before we came along, nobody enforced it. So there really were never any consequences for conflicts or gift violations, things like that. Occasionally the solicitor would get involved, and the solicitor's office would give advice from time to time. But council now understands that we need to have better rules. They have to be clear, like the new gift rule is much clearer than the old rule, and the new conflict rule is much clearer and a little bit broader than the old rule. But it's critical. And I think, in Philadelphia, we're having very high-level discussions about what the rules should be. And I look around the country, and I think there are very few places that are having those kinds of discussions. But it's taken us almost 10 years to get to the point where we can have those conversations with council.
I would just add, I of course agree with everything Shane said. I do think it is, if folks who are developing these rules, who are pushing for their implementation, to step back a little bit and restrain any impulse to try and micromanage municipal government. That's what we're familiar with. Certainly, I think that's true at that level. I mean, the rules do need to be practicable and workable because government has to function. And city officials have to use their judgment and have to be trusted to use their judgment. You need to identify the particular areas of concern and draw a line around those things, but not, in my view anyway, try to get too down into the nitty gritty, because as Shane said, if the rules seem unfair or ridiculous, people lose respect for them and then they don't follow them.
I had one thing to add on this. I think what you said about education is key. When the governor issued the executive order on the gift ban, he just said, okay, there's one rule, just say no thanks. But of course, there needed to be more guidance as far as exactly what did that mean. I know when I go to a conference and I pick up a conference bag, sometimes there's like a free hat in there or a keychain or something like that. So, you just pick it up and you don't think about it. But, there was a lot of education that had to go into the executive order, and also on both sides. So I'm sure many of you have heard of Pennsylvania Society. I've never been, but I'm sure maybe some people in this room have been. But, and you've been? Okay, so you can relate to it. But it's an event in New York in the wintertime where politicians, raise money and lobbyists have parties and all of this. So that was a big issue with the executive order is, okay, we have these parties with, alcohol and food, and how are we going to comply with the gift ban? So, guidance was really important, and also educating the lobbyists as well, because nobody wants to violate the law. Everybody wants to comply, but it was just, figuring out the best way to go about doing that.
Can I just say something about that as well? And that's probably one of the most important things we're going to be speaking about, because it's so easy to violate really the gift rule. And I mean, I just came from a conference, League of Municipalities in New Jersey, this morning, as a matter of fact. And I have attended the Pennsylvania Society, and it's crazy. I mean, it's a lot of things that go on, but it just, to me, that's the most difficult part, because I have a lot of friends. I don't have brothers, sisters. I have friends. I have a sister in New York, but I don't talk that much. But the thing is, if I go out to eat with a friend and he pays for a drink or something, they'll have to report that. And all those things need to be, and I think the part of education is the most important one, because I also feel it's hard to say no to your friends when you're paying for their food sometimes, because we're friends. Doesn't want anything from me. I don't want anything. We're just friends. And those are the things that need to be probably explained a little bit better on how, it's not like he's going to do a project with the city and I'm going to vote on it. That really never happens. But do I have to report every time I go out with my friend, go on vacation together, and do I have to report every time that I go out with him on vacation? If he buys me dinner and I pay one day, he pays another day, it just goes crazy.
If I could mention something that brings up a point that I would like to discuss, and I think it goes to the gift rules and everything that we talked about, is who is a friend? I mean, when we discuss this stuff, there's a book that I bought but I haven't read yet, and it deals with manifest destiny and corruption in the federal government. And all ethic rules, or a lot of the ethics rules passed in the federal government, are reactionary. Somebody did something, so now we have to pass a rule so that doesn't happen again. And what's funny is what goes around comes around. So the rules that were passed in 1860, and a lot of rules came out of the Civil War that with contracting and conflicts of interest, those same laws that were passed in 1880 were used in 1980 to prosecute people for doing essentially the same things, except that instead of selling, carbine rifles, they were selling, ballistic missiles to the Air Force. But anyways, ethics rules tend to be reactionary because something happened and the public is upset about it, and we want to make sure that never happens again. So I think when a board or an entity is thinking about passing ethics laws, they have to take a look into the future and try to not only be specific enough to address and provide clear guidance, but also to be broad enough that you can encompass those scenarios that you didn't think about. And when it comes down to the issue of friends, in my opinion, there's a question as to who really is your friend, and there was a public official who every year got a Christmas wreath. And he retired from public service, and his wife said, "We didn't get our Christmas wreath this year, I wonder why." And he says, "I don't know, my friend didn't send it to me." So he calls his friend, and his friend's office says, "Well, you're not a public official anymore." So I think, with the question, you go out to dinner with your friend and I buy my friend, if this is a friend you're calling at 3 a.m. because your car broke down, you have to report that. No, that's asinine. Okay, that's not what the Ethics Act is designed to encompass. If you're talking about, though, my friend who I know because he comes in my office 3 times a week and we discuss contracts, and I can't tell you anything else about the guy. I think those are the rules that that ethics are trying to encompass. That those are the types of gifts that we're trying to ban. Those are the types of influencing that we're trying to prohibit, not the true, the familiar bond or the friendships that people have. So roundabout answer is, can ethics rules be can they be oppressive? I believe they can be. And that's the inherent problem with drafting ethics laws. How much is enough?
Question for both state and local enforcement: when you reach a settlement agreement with someone, is that information made public or not? And if not, why not?
All of our settlement agreements are required by law to be public. We issue a press release, we just issued one today, and then they're posted on our website.
That's the same for us. Anything is issued, any settlement or any kind of penalty that is levied is done through a public order, and we also issue a press release as well.
That actually reminds me of something else is, as our enforcement and investigation activities developed, something that we came to see as one of the really major benefits of the enforcement activity, not the monetary penalty, the two things. I mean, that's important for deterrent effects, but really the admission of violation, because there you have the acknowledgement, here's a rule, okay, I messed up, I made a mistake. That takes out a whole lot of denial. It helps keep things clearer for other people. But also the explanation, the creating and making public the factual record of what happened. That, in my experience, is something that the public really wants. They want to know how their government is functioning. There's a lot of cynicism about what happens behind closed doors. And so when you can say, here's what happened, and you have the history of what happened, and then there's a penalty and there's a admission of violation, that's a very, very important part of the process.
This question is from the audience for Mr. Guridy. What is your advice regarding a city ordinance on ethics for the city of Bethlehem? Why is this a good thing to have? I guess I would add, what are the basic requirements for the local government ethics program? So what would you advise Bethlehem? Is it a good thing to have, and how do we start?
It's certainly a good thing to have. It's a good question because we're in Bethlehem, but it's certainly a good thing to have. Because, I mean, there are people who, start with a good intention to run for public office, and along the way you encounter, contractors who want a contract. They want to take you out to dinner. They want to take you out to lunch. They want to, buy you gifts. Probably, what is it that you got? Your friend got in your story, getting it ripped with you or whatever. But I think the issue is how much can you really do without violating the law? And those are the things, the issue of transparency. We have a city council person in Allentown. It was during the time I was there, during my first term. And that person went out to San Francisco for a conference, okay? Got in a limousine, from the airport, and everything was charged to the city. And that same person went to Puerto Rico. It's not a Puerto Rican, by the way, but went to Puerto Rico and went to another conference over there, came back first class, And those type of things, they were charged, that person charged the city on this. So, we gotta have some rules. Eventually she got investigated. I'm sorry. That person got investigated by the ethics board, and it was asked to restitute, to repay the money to the city, and that person did do that. But the issue is you have to have a separate, independent group of people who we can see that are honest and have integrity to oversee, those kind of cases. And we use the ethics board whenever it's not like the meeting every week or anything. We use them as we need them. And I think in that case that I was telling you, I think that was the state ethics board that actually followed that investigation of that person. But the whole issue I was talking about earlier in regards to city's employee, code enforcement employee, having a business in the city. We had a plumber that also had a business in the city, and he was a plumber in the city, but he would get full permits for other plumbers who didn't have a license and had tons of problems. And those kind of things is, and then the people wouldn't do the job correctly. So, they have problems. So those are the kind of issues that we need to continue to make sure that we investigate and that we put into law in some kind of ethics that hey, you're allowed to do this, and this, but you can't do this and that because it's detrimental to the residents that we're serving and to the public and also to the environment, to the community in general. So I think I agree. I think we need to have some kind of ethics code.
Thank you, Mr. Meredith.
I'm going to try to combine two audience questions here. What kinds of people get appointed to an ethics board? What are the backgrounds of the people who get appointed to those boards? And we have quite a few attorneys here represented. You have to be an attorney to be on a board. Are there other people that serve on these boards who have different kinds of backgrounds? And does political party matter in these appointments to ethics boards?
Our agency has a 7-member commission, and the commissioners are the deciding body in our agency. The appointment is essentially the House majority, House minority, each gets an appointment. Senate majority, Senate minority, essentially. And then the governor gets 3 appointees, no more than 2 of which may be from the same political party. And they serve for a 3-year term. They can serve two terms or at the pleasure of their appointing authority. So a member can serve well past 6 years. They can serve almost indefinitely. Similar to Philadelphia, they can only be removed for cause. Political parties, we are, the Ethics Commission has within the Act restrictions on political activities of the commissioners. For example, they cannot be engaged in any political office, they cannot support any political candidacy, they're not allowed to serve on any political committee, and that also extends to their spouses. So our commissioners are difficult positions to fill because they generally do come from political backgrounds. There is no requirement that you be a lawyer. We've had farmers, we've had police officers, we've had businessmen, we've had religious leaders. All of those have served on our board. I think we've been very fortunate with our appointees.
Yeah, we have 5 members again, and there is no requirement to be a lawyer, although currently all board members are lawyers, and we've had, I'd say, the vast majority of past board members have been lawyers. We've also had a couple of ministers, reverends, and we've also had Sister Mary Scullion, who's sort of a local celebrity, who's sort of a national celebrity, was on our board for some time. I don't think that it's necessary that you have all board members be lawyers, but it certainly helps because when you're going through a draft board advisory opinion, which has been prepared by the general counsel that involves the first interpretation of a provision or the first application of an ethics rule to a particular set of facts that is novel and new and has never been addressed before. It's kind of like, issuing a judicial decision. And so, and similarly with understanding settlement agreements and administrative adjudication decisions that involve violations of laws, it certainly helps to have a legal background. That said, people are suspicious of groups of lawyers, and so it's good from time to time to have some different perspectives on there, and I've really enjoyed having some of the non-lawyers, particularly the ministers and especially Sister Mary. They give great perspective, and they also give the board a certain weight. When they speak at a meeting about something, a public meeting or even an executive session, people listen in a different way to people who are not lawyers, and especially people like ministers and Sister Mary. So I think it's good to have some legal understanding, not essential. Good to have a mix. And for the last question about political parties, it's not an issue in Philadelphia. Philadelphia's great majority is Democratic anyway. The whole city, we're pretty much enforcing mostly against Democrats and
Not entirely.
not entirely. That's true.
Just one thing, I of course agree with everything that you said. But it's just the conversation brought to mind something for me. When we think about what we do, it's sometimes our name, Board of Ethics, can be a bit of a burden or can cause a false, in my view anyway, perception of what we do. We're really the board of rules that promote the proper functioning of city government, which doesn't fit on a business card very nicely, but that's what we do. We're not the board of right and wrong. And that different folks might have different views about what they want, but from our perspective, the way we've approached it in Philadelphia is we don't get up and say, this is a bad person. You're immoral, you're unethical. We say, here are the rules, and you broke the rule, and you'll be held accountable for breaking the rule. And that just fits into the way we try to view and communicate what we do to try and take out some of that strong feeling about it and also make it easier for people to follow what we're doing.
That's why back in, I think it was '87, the New York Ethics Board changed its name to the New York Conflict of Interest Board because the board members at that time, mostly lawyers, decided, look, it's really just about conflict of interest rules, not ethics. It's confusing, and that's why they changed their name.
Okay. This comes from the audience, and it's kind of a procedural question.
That would be for Michael then.
Can municipalities pass campaign contributions and spending limits? Can they do it through ordinance, or does it require a referendum?
This might even be more for Lee than
I'm going to punt on this one.
Well, like the governor did at the state level, he passed an executive order, but of course, executive orders aren't permanent. So if another governor comes into office that doesn't agree with a gift ban, for example, he can rescind that. So that's why, the governor's office, the policy really thinks it's important to pass legislation that's actually permanent, that's long-lasting, that will, definitely have an impact for years to come. So it can be done both ways, but legislation is definitely more permanent.
I think something to keep in mind for municipalities, perhaps a little different from the state level, is it depends a little bit on your status. I mean, Philadelphia is a home rule charter city of the first class. We can do almost anything we want, as long as it's not preempted by state law. And there's specific guidelines for what would be preempted. I don't know the status of Bethlehem. I do know that in Montgomery County, they tried to institute some political activity restrictions that I believe the Supreme Court struck down because they were not a home rule municipality in the same way Philadelphia was. So that, I think, is a really important question to know at the outset, and you're going to have to, your city solicitor, whoever, you look at that closely to decide, if we do it by ordinance, is it actually going to be legally enforceable? do we need to do it by charter? Can we do it by charter, and so on?
And I think the Montgomery County example involved one branch passed the laws, like I think the commissioners, the county commissioners promulgated the political activity restrictions, and I think independently elected offices opposed it and challenged it successfully in court because the commissioners could not impose those kind of rules, restrictions on independently elected offices. But in Philadelphia, again, we have the Home Rule Charter. Our city campaign finance law, though, is not a charter provision, which would require a referendum to amend the charter. The Ethics Board is a charter entity. We were approved by voters in a ballot question back in 2006, but the campaign finance law is an ordinance.
It's true. I think even sort of more important perhaps for the distinction between ethics and campaign finance laws, the State Ethics Act specifically authorizes local governments to pass their own legislation as long as it is adding restrictions as opposed to weakening the restrictions that are imposed by the State Ethics Act. So you have the specific authority under state law to do that. Campaign finance is a little trickier. There's an argument that should be there also, but you have to be more careful that if you're doing a local campaign finance law, you're doing it in a way that doesn't conflict with the state election code.
And our law did survive a preemption challenge.
Another question from the audience interested in what are some examples of the worst kind of unethical practices you've encountered? How are those actions dealt with? Do people ever go to jail? Does anybody ever lose their pension as a result of these things? So whoever wants to field those questions.
The State Ethics Act, I can hit on points of it. The State Ethics Act does carry criminal penalties. A conflict of interest is a felony. We do not charge crimes. We handle matters administratively. We can issue orders, and we could order restitution with a treble penalty. The largest order that we've issued since I've been with the commission, I've been with the commission about 10 years, was for it was $400,000 is the most we've issued. We compromised that, which means the commission ordered a penalty of about $100,000, and then the treble penalty was another $300,000 for a total of $4 million. We compromised it down to $100,000 because the guy who we issued the order against was going to federal prison, and he said either take $100 grand now and live with it, or you'll never get anything from me because I'm going to federal prison. So we decided that it probably was in the best interest of the state to get to 100 grand, which was what he wrongfully took, and forgo the penalty since, again, he was going to federal prison. So yes, people do go to jail over these. Those are the largest penalties. That's one of the largest penalties we've issued. Most of our penalties are orders of restitution, and they fall anywhere between $5,000 and probably $15,000, $20,000 is probably the average. Most egregious activity that you've seen or that we've seen, I think the most egregious ones maybe are not necessarily big money cases, but it's just such a violation. It just really goes to the heart of the Ethics Act, where someone just really abuses their authority. We have cases where they're local cases, townships, boroughs, where you have a supervisor or a borough council member who just really is a jerk and just treats everybody like a jerk, and they treat themselves like a king. And you know, they're mean to staff, they're mean to the road workers, they're condescending to the secretaries. You know, they treat the borough building like it's their own, you know, it's their own Fortune 500 company. And they set themselves up like a fiefdom. And you know, at the end of the day, what are we penalizing those people? You know, that might be a $1,500 case, but it's just so egregious with the way that they acted and their attitudes that a lot of times we'll try to settle those cases for, hey, here's the deal, we'll cut the penalty down to $500, but you agree to get out of office and not hold office again. And sometimes that works. So that's a quick answer to that.
So quickly, I agree with Brian. I don't think that the nature of the conduct always matches the dollar amount of the fine. Our highest fine so far has been $48,000. It was a mix of ethics and campaign finance violations. I think that the vast majority of our cases involve, I don't want to call them inadvertent, but mistakes. They either poor record keeping in campaign finance or just a lack of understanding of how the rules may apply to certain conduct. But there have been cases with very deliberate conduct, and I think I tend not to like to answer this question, what's your worst case? I don't like to judge cases. I typically don't do that. But there have been some examples, and you can see our settlements on websites. On our website, for example, there was one time where a mayoral candidate, let's see, we had radio ads run in a mayoral election, and they were against a candidate who had been on city council, is now a candidate running for mayor, and the radio ads were aired on what was self-described as black formatted radio stations, and it said that this individual had been against the relocation of a Baptist church, and being against that relocation was like being against God. And it said this disclaimer for the radio ad said paid for by, and had this guy with this very deep baritone voice. It was very impressive, and it said paid for by, what was the name of the group?
The Alliance for Better Christians.
Which doesn't exist. And what actually happened was the opponent, one of the opponents of the mayoral candidate this ad was against, had funneled money through a couple of different channels, actually had treasurer checks cut that were delivered and cashed by a political operative with questionable credentials. And then the cash was then given to another operative who had a relationship with the radio stations and paid the radio stations. Of course, they won't air ads unless they get paid up front. And again, we had, they had described those expenditures incorrectly. They sort of covered up their tracks several different ways. We presented the results of our investigation to attorneys representing this candidate, and they said, no, you've got it all wrong. Give us a chance to explain this. And we said, okay, go ahead. And then eventually they did admit. They said, okay. We conducted a very thorough investigation. We got all sorts of records, including we talked to the guy that did the recording. We got the audio file. We had metadata from that, and we got their emails from their email server, and we had all sorts of smoking guns, and they agreed to pay an extra $10,000 above the penalties just to resolve the case.
To reimburse us for investigative costs.
Right.
Okay, this question comes from the audience too. How do government employees know what is unethical if there's no ordinance to spell it out? In other words, what are the pitfalls of not having an ethics program?
Well, I think if you don't have a program, well, first of all, what is a program? I think it's, again, a set of rules that have consequences if those rules aren't being followed. And to be fair to those that are subject to the rules, you need good, clear rules, and you need training and education around those rules. If you don't have that kind of program, and we're like in Philadelphia, and at the state level, where you have regular announcements of settlement agreements or administrative adjudications or court actions. Like today, we announced a settlement in a lobbying case. If you don't have that, people are going to be naturally suspicious of their government. They are anyway, and they believe that terrible things are happening. And what a good ethics program, a good robust ethics program gives a municipal government or a state government or even the federal government is a level of transparency and accountability that would not be there if you did not have the rules or the rules being enforced. And so that leads to suspicion and an erosion of public confidence in government decisions and actions. And so if you want to have, better confidence, public confidence in government action, you really need to have a robust ethics program.
I think we have time for one more question.
I'll go with one more, two-part question then. Do any of the panelists know how many municipalities in Pennsylvania have an ethics board, or what percentage of municipalities have an ethics board? Is Bethlehem an outlier in not having one? And the second question is, what would you say would be the approximate cost of administration and enforcement of an ethics law ordinance for a city, a small city like Bethlehem? Roughly speaking, it was $1 million for Philadelphia, it'd be much less for Bethlehem. So, any idea what the cost might be?
I mean, you can speak in general, but I can speak specifically about, we don't pay anything. Our people, our ethics board is volunteer. So there's no cost to it. The cost is basically printing material, perhaps, if anything, and the time you spend developing the ethics board. But, I want to also take a second to go back to where you were, the previous question as regards to, the city's employees, municipality employees, how do they know? And I just went to a training of ethics in New Orleans, and, one of the things that they said is if it's something that's going to benefit you or any of your family members or a friend, that from tax dollars resources, then you shouldn't do it. And education, I think, is the most important thing for all employees, not only public institutional employees, but also private. If you are working for a company, I used to work for a bank for a long time, and if you're working for a company and you're printing paper and you're copying the copy machine of the company, that's unethical. If the paper is for yourself and you're benefiting from it, or you're doing things that really not benefiting what you're supposed to be doing. So it's not only for public employees, although they get instructed, but it's your personal integrity, I think. How ethical are you as a person? And, when we look at the federal government, we look at Citizens United, we look at all these other things, people spending money all over like crazy, how do we keep it ethical in local government when the federal government spend money like crazy, okay? They get lobbyists spending money, like giving money to people like there's no tomorrow, And how do we do that? How do we conform? How do we teach our people locally to do the right thing when our leaders, federally, are doing so much wrong? And that's something that we have to take inside. That's something that we got to think about. And it's just terrible. It's terrible. That's some of the things that they're doing at the federal government, because they're supposed to be teaching us and helping us. We have a home rule charter as well. And we're smaller cities. Allentown is the third largest city in the States, but it only has 125, 23,000 people. And it just, when you see kids and you see employees in the city and they tell me, look what they does, look what she does. How moral, how ethical is that? But instead of castigating the people, we actually elect them and re-elect them. I rest my case.
If I can just add one thing, I think Reading has had some kind of an ethics program, but I don't know much about it. And we just picked up something on a newswire earlier this week about Pittsburgh. I think they've rebooted their.
That's correct. They're trying to.
They're trying to. I quickly read through the ordinance and the budget for it. They have a 9-member board, which seems extremely high to me. But and they only have an executive director whose salary is, I think, $61,000, and they have a budget for an investigator that they haven't hired yet of only $20,000. I'm not sure how you're going to get somebody for $20,000,
Yeah,
but
right.
their total budget is $100,000 based on what I saw. So I think beyond Philadelphia, there isn't a lot out there. And I think even around the country, I think you'll see at the state level, almost every state has an ethics agency. Some of them do campaign finance and ethics, some just do ethics, some do lobbying and ethics. There are various combinations. But there are not many measurable ethics programs at the municipal level. There's New York, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Seattle, San Francisco, Oakland, and then Chicago. And then beyond that, these are agencies with budgets of more than $500,000 and staff of more than 6. The bigger cities, New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, have budgets of just over $2 million and staff of around 20 to 25. But below that class I just mentioned, you get down to some agencies that will have a staff of 1, Denver, Atlanta, I think, somewhere in Florida where Carla is. I think it's really difficult to have an effective agency with a staff of 1 and a budget that's really only funding 1 salary. So you have to think about what are the functions you want to have. You want to have someone who can interpret it and advise on the rules. That's going to require a general counsel type person. And then you're going to need someone who can do the enforcement side. Probably should be a different person. And both those people are going to have to be lawyers. And then, finally you need somebody to do training, and that can be a combination of a general counsel person or an enforcement person. All the attorneys on our staff, whether they're on the enforcement side or general counsel side, participate in training on some level.
If I may, just very quickly with the time, there's a great resource that's free, and I'm sitting right here. The State Ethics Act applies to all elected officials in the Commonwealth, so that would include the elected officials for the city of Bethlehem. And the Ethics Act applies to them as well. Where we run into the problem is our budget is about $2 million, and we have about 17 people, and we cover the entire state of Pennsylvania, 67 counties. Philadelphia has 11 people and about $1 million budget, and they cover the city of Philadelphia, which is 1 county in a lot of people. We think we're effective with a small number and a small budget. What we don't know, though, is we can't be everywhere all the time. So what happened last night in the city of Bethlehem, we don't know. What happened with that contractor at that meeting, we don't know. Unless somebody tells us, we don't know what's going on in these local communities, and that really starts the front line with the citizens. And the citizens need to play an active role in their government, and they need to be informed citizens. And by showing up to meetings, by using the right to know law, by knowing the Ethics Act, by knowing the laws, and being here tonight, you folks are informed and you're conscientious of what's going on in your government. Do you need an ethics committee? Do you need an ethics commission here in Bethlehem? Maybe you do. Does it have to be budgeted with a fund? Does it have to be compensated, people to sit on it? No, you can appoint volunteer members just to play an active role. Have them go to every meeting, have them review contracts. And then if you need an investigative arm, maybe not. Maybe what you could do is say, hey, look, we think there's something shady here going on. Here's the meeting minutes. Here's the contracts. Let's send it to the State Ethics Commission and see what they can do about it. And then you can file a complaint with us. If it's something that the city eventually decides, hey, we want to take even, as Mr. Kramer said, or I think it might have been Mr. Cook, the Ethics Act doesn't prohibit you from creating your own local, more restrictive laws. So if you want to really put a ban on gifts of local officials, you can do that. The State Ethics Act has no gift ban. But if you want to ban public officials in the city from taking gifts or from receiving campaign contributions or whatever you want to do, you can do that. And that may be what your local ethics board can do. But don't feel that if you don't have the budget to create an ethics board right away, that the city's doomed. You're not. Just, again, keep us in mind. We are a resource for you folks out here as well.
Dr. Foltz?
I'm Dr. Foltz. I'm the interim director of the Southside Initiative, and I'm just going to share a few words and close the evening. First, I want to thank you all for coming out to engage in civic discussion of ethics ordinances. Like the League of Women Voters, the Southside Initiative seeks to promote democratic engagement about pressing issues in our community. We hope that tonight's discussion has been a conversation about ethics ordinances that our community of Bethlehem can continue in the coming months. Truly, I am grateful to all the panelists for making the journey from Harrisburg or Philly or Allentown to share their expertise with us tonight. I also want to thank Dr. Kincaid and Beverly Hernandez for being moderators this evening. And I especially want to thank the League of Women Voters, Barbara Diamond and Joan, for organizing this event. And I want to thank you for taking time to participate in this important conversation. Please join me in thanking our panelists.
I guess that's it.